Good morning, everyone. We're very glad to join you, Katie, Paulina, and myself, and we wanted to take a few moments to share with you our reflections on what is inclusive education, what are the limits, what are the boundaries. And to start us off, I'll give you a visual description, even though I myself are partially blind, so correct me if I get this wrong. I'm wearing a grey suit. Yes? Excellent. And I think my tie is pink and navy. Good, got that right. Excellent. So as you can hear, my Irish accent means the Irish are taking over the Zero Project. Thank you, Caroline. And we wanted to ask you for a few moments, imagine that you're sitting on a three-legged stool. And what are those three legs that you sit on? One of them is the leg of challenge. What's the challenge in this work we're doing together in inclusive education? Second leg, what are some successes? What's working well? And lastly, what do we choose to do in our own context that makes sense? And so, together with Katie and Paulina, we're going to spend a few moments looking at each of those three things, not an exhaustive list, not a prescriptive list at all, but just our own personal sense from our own context around what are some big challenges we notice in this work of inclusive education, what are some bright spots and some successes, and what is some advice we would offer based on our own experience. So I'd like to start with the first one, the challenge. What is a big pressing challenge? I was really glad to hear President Cordano mention this in the last few moments, binary thinking. That, for me, is our biggest challenge. The binary trap. And what does that mean? It means that we fall in love with one perspective, with one opinion, with one idea. And from my experience, the one thing I know about love is blind. We forget about the other possibilities. Let me give you three examples from my own experience in inclusive education. For many years, I worked in investment banking while I slowly was losing my sight, and then I left to work on disability as a full-time job through coaching, consulting, and also teaching at NYU. And what have I noticed? One of the binary traps I notice is we get it into our heads that there is only room for mainstream education. We should, all of us, be in a mainstream system, and that's the best way for inclusive education to be honored. Or we think the opposite. Mainstream education isn't resourced for this kind of tailored education support and learning support that people like me need in order to access the learning environment. I cannot see slides. I can't read with the naked eye. Will I be able to learn in a mainstream environment? And so, rather than falling into the trap of one or the other, as we just heard from the president of Gallaudet explaining to us, that's actually a binary trap. We lose perspective that context actually matters. And instead of falling in love with our own idea or our own opinion about which is best, let's pause and ask. Let's ask the learners, the parents. Let's ask the community based on context, which of these approaches best supports them? Which of these approaches or blend of approaches can actually help them experience inclusive education? A second example, we start to think that inclusive education is just about primary school and how we educate our kids in that first level of education. What about secondary school? What about university? What about higher education? In my own case, I teach a class on disability at NYU in the spring. What difference does it make that graduate students come into a class and see a blind professor? What impact do you think that has on sighted people or those who currently think they are not disabled? What impact does that have on people with an experience of disability or neurodiversity? Representation really matters. So for me, inclusive education goes far beyond primary school, far beyond the topic of young children who need vital support through inclusive primary education. It continues through the different levels and also shows up in the representation. What are we teaching our kids if the professors, the teachers, are not evidence of inclusion? And lastly, please don't think you're special. Now, I know we're all here doing special work, but don't think that the work we do in inclusive education is niche. It is not niche work we are doing. It is mainstream work we are doing. So yes, we are special, but we're special because the work we do around inclusive education matters for the mainstream, for everyone. Yesterday at the Parliament, we heard the Speaker of the National Council say that for him, inclusion is obvious and needs to be everywhere. In my own work at NYU, I'm not trying to teach another specialization on disability. I'm trying to teach a class that welcomes everyone, all graduate students, into this topic, because when we learn about disability and accessibility, we are better advocates, not just on these topics, but in general. We are better leaders in general. And so, as you spend these next days together, take some time to notice your own blind spots. Notice the things that you might have fallen in love with in terms of what inclusive education means to you. And take the time to ask. Get curious. Listen to each other. Find out what you don't know and see how you can diversify your own work and make sure that when you do approach inclusive education, you do so in a very inclusive way. So that for me is a challenge that I'd love to invite us all to focus on and work on during these sessions in the days ahead. And I'd like to turn to my colleague Paulina and ask from her perspective, what, Paulina, for you is a challenge that you see in this world?
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Paulina, and just to introduce myself, so I am a representative of International Federation of Hard of Hearing Young People, and I wear black clothes right now. I wear glasses, and I have long hair, and I am tall. So to answer your question, in my opinion, one of the biggest challenges is that we sometimes, as educators, as people who are involved in creating the inclusive environment, we often not asking people for whom we are creating such kind of environment. So we are not asking people, individuals with disabilities, what exactly are their needs, expectations from the inclusive education, because what I can say is that we have to explore the real life situations and to be those kind of curious people to ask questions to each individual about what do you really need, how can I help you, because usually then we are creating, we make such a kind of mistake that we have assumptions that everything is the same for everybody. So this is not true. I think that this is what I want to say.
Thank you, Paulina. And turning to the other leg on our stool this morning, we think about advice, practical advice based on our own experience in this world of inclusive education. What's some advice you would offer anyone here today listening or online who wants to make a difference in inclusive education?
So first of all, I think that I would like to share a story, like two different stories of the same person. And the things that happened between each of them is just only a few weeks. So the situation took place in Poland, in a country where until recently students with a hearing loss, because I am an expert in hearing loss things, so students with hearing loss were exempted from learning a foreign language, which was obligatory in a Polish curriculum. So there was a belief that that learning a second language would struggle with if their own language posed difficulties also for them. But it was years before the story happened, so misconceptions were still existing. So the story is that from the beginning of the secondary school, the students studied so hard foreign languages, so English and German in this case. And because she wanted to take an English, what's called a matura, so exam at the extended level, so not the basic one. And her dream was simple, to travel abroad and be independent then. However, because of her hearing loss, she was not able to participate in discussions. She struggled, for example, with the spelling tests, and also she had to be a first student for reading and exercises, to volunteer because she wouldn't follow the conversations later. However, she was good in writing assignments that did not require a good hearing. But the problem, the obstacle was that the teacher didn't know how to assist her, often resulting that students felt excluded. So this teacher didn't expect much and demand much from the student, so this student even wanted to speak correctly and improve her pronunciation. So her needs here were ignored, obviously. As a result, she couldn't speak English when she graduated from secondary school, and not also in terms of pronunciation, but also lacked fluency in English, and which her peers acquired through conversational exercises in class. So her hardest struggle was accepting the teacher's opinion that she should take the basic level English exam for her graduation, because the teacher believed she wouldn't manage this advantage level. So she agreed at that time, but she couldn't accept that. And there were some problems that we have to consider, and it's for sure more complex. So first of all, about the aspirations and expectations of that person with a disability were not fulfilled. Secondly, also the teacher didn't believe in the capabilities of that student, so not fully exploring the possibilities. So relying the belief that easy is better. So if the student can't hear, she surely can't manage, at least not in the oral part. So the ableism appears here. So there were also other things to consider in regard of the problems. But on the contrary, there is a positive thing in the story, because the same student, but with different circumstances. So a few months later, that student decided to attend the university. So she chose a university that was accessible for a person with a hearing disability. So they provided English classes for deaf and hard of hearing, which were accommodated to the needs of such a group of students. So using innovative methods, tools, and so on. And also that teacher who was teaching that student, she also was laying the groundwork for pseudo-glottodidactics, which is learning foreign languages to deaf and hard of hearing people in a friendly environment. So the first question the teacher asked that student was, what do you expect from the classes, and what would you like to focus on? So here you can see a different perspective of the situation, a different position of that teacher. So the student's immediate response was learn to speak and converse in English, but also to be able to use English in practical settings, so to travel abroad and be independent with the communication. Yeah, so the teacher was not afraid to work with the student on her pronunciation. What's more, the student was even invited to participate in an international training. And that student was not sure about that. He had concerns in regard of the level of her English. but the teacher listened to her worries and encouraged her to try because she believed the student could handle it. So on multiple occasions, as there were more opportunities for the student to travel, this teacher motivated her by saying that if a person wants something regardless of limitations, they at least can try to achieve it. So the result? So I am here with you in Vienna because this is a story of my life, which means that I am not only participating in the conference, but I am also representing the hard of hearing community, which means that I am advocating for the rights of such a community. And let's say that being a student of that teacher helped me a lot to improve myself, not only like my English skills, but also in regard of other kind of skills, such we call soft skills. And of course, there were so many other factors that contributed to this outcome, but what I want to emphasize is that sometimes the belief of just one person, so it doesn't matter if this is an educator, if this is a colleague or someone, but just one teacher or that believe in a person with a disability, a faith in their abilities and the idea that person with a disability can also have inspirations. So that was a long story, but I think that in the meantime there were some things mentioned like ableism and like aspirations of such kind of people. But to answer, I think that this is also important to look ahead and imagine a future where our students not only did well in school, but they will also be equal members in the society. So for us as creators of inclusivity, this is necessary to think beyond of the present and create an environment that supports students for the long run. So it's more about fostering long-term resilience and empowerment. We also need to consider how our actions today will affect students in the future. So this is like a long-term impact of inclusive practices. So it's not about making things inclusive for now, it's more about giving students the tools that they need to face challenges and success in the future. So don't do the things for them, but give them the tools. So this is my other advice. When it comes to the way we help, it's a good question if it's really helpful. Sometimes it's too much, or the wrong kind of help can actually make things harder for students. And we need to find the right balance so that we are truly supporting them, not unintentionally holding them back. So also, this means that there is a need for a change in educators' mindset. So the example with using a charity approach may lead to ableism. So while having good intention can have a drawbacks. So it hinders the development of resilience and the ability to take control of someone's opportunities for growth, stopping them from developing important life skills. So also, inclusion is not just a concept, so this is my last thing, that impacts the student and their surroundings temporarily, but it's more than just what unfolds before our eyes in the here and now. So inclusion is the future existing in the present.
That's a good
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So, I would like to continue this session by asking Catherine about her practical experience, because you are director for the School for Blind People. So my question is, just give me a second. Would you mind to share like one example of a good practice from your work that everybody have to hear about, because this is really important also to not talk about challenges, but also to share like good practices. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paulina. So I'm Catherine Holland. I'm the Executive Director of International Programs at the Perkins School for the Blind. I'm wearing a green dress today, and I have, let's say, shoulder-length hair. I think, Paulina, the question you're asking, makes me think of what does success look like? When we talk about best practice, we're really asking ourselves, what is success? And I think success for us in this room today, it's a child learning. Success is a child learning. So everything has to start with the child. We have to think, what is a child's needs? What are her strengths? Then we can begin to think, what are the services and support this child would need to address those needs and to amplify those strengths? Then we can begin to think, in what setting would those services most likely be delivered? And we can begin to think about how we might fill the gaps, but it has to start with a child. Now, we also have to remember that for a child, learning is not just about academics, right? A child wants to make friends, to make choices, to explore their dreams, to understand what it means to belong in a community and to participate, and ideally to find their place in the world. I think that's what every family wants for our children in learning. So when we're talking about inclusive education and thinking about success, we have to care about these things because children care about these things. So that I think is a very important thing to start with. And now I'd like to also share a brief story. This one's not about Paulina. It's a story about a young man who lives in Indonesia. He runs a small business with fellow young adults in his community. He attends a community resource center. And this young man, Arif, is also partially blind and has cerebral palsy. Now, as a small boy, Arif was unable to move or to speak on his own. And actually, he was abandoned in a graveyard. So I think for just a moment to pause and think about the total desperation, isolation, lack of support that a family would experience to make a heartbreaking decision like that. But the good news for us and for Arif is that he was found and he was brought to this community resource center where the teachers welcomed him and helped him participate and coached and supported him to become the young man he is today. So the question is how? How did that happen? Well, the answer is that those educators and professionals in that center over a long period of time had coaching and mentoring from Perkins School for the Blind to think about foundational ideas like how to explore the possibilities of every child and to gain foundational skills like how to communicate with children who communicate in different ways, how to organize a learning environment for children who might move in different ways, how to adapt learning materials for children based on what they can or cannot see or hear. And so then these teachers were ready with the confidence and the positive attitude and the skills to welcome this boy and support him with what he needed to learn. So in this story, inclusion is not a place. It's a process, it's a mindset. Inclusion is a series of courageous choices informed by practical skills and expertise, centered on the child, and fueled by this core belief that every child can learn. Now, I think many humans, we have an awfully hard time imagining what we've never seen, and many people have never seen what it looks like when a boy like Arif is really included in a classroom and in a community. So many people want to focus on what children with disabilities cannot do. But not us. Not us here, and not all of us here in the room and watching online. We know what children with disabilities can do. We know that every child can learn. And so our goal today on this panel was to begin a conversation. For sure, there are many things we did not talk about. We specifically took this three-legged stool that Brandon mentioned and just took some specific questions that we hoped we could answer from our own experience and perspective. Our idea was to start a conversation that all of us can continue now here in Vienna and going forward about what is inclusive education. And I just want to close with going back actually to the quotation that Caroline Casey read this morning from the poet Mary Oliver. I think there are moments where we are the lonely ones and the geese are calling to us to announce our place in the world. But there are many more moments where we have to be those wild geese, and we must announce over and over again the place that each child has in the family of things. Thank you so much for being with us today.